Right, it's 13 minutes away from 9 o'clock. It really is quite a tricky trial to follow. It's the leadership battle of the International Pentecost Holiness Church. Exactly who should be in charge of it has been an ongoing battle between previous leader Glayton Modise's three sons. That's because Modise passed away in 2016, sparking a scramble for power, which sadly has often been marred by violence. So, of course, the dispute has ended up in the courts, and that's where we find Silindelo Masikane, eNCA senior reporter, joining us this morning. And every time we've come to you, it started off fairly quietly, and then the various supporters of the various factions make their way to you. We'll talk about that in a moment, but there's also been complications with the judge, I understand, looking at reports around safety and the judge itself. Just bring us up to speed on where we are with that.
Well, of course, Gareth, we know that this trial is about 7 years in the making. Like you've said, that we've got three brothers who are all contesting the leadership of the International Pentecost Holiness Church following the death of its leader back in 2016, Glayton Modise. The IPHC is also known as the Modise Church. It boasts around a 3 million membership, not only in South Africa, but across the borders in countries such as Botswana as well as Lesotho. And we also know that following Glayton Modise's death, there were issues around whether he had left a will, and it seems that he hadn't. And so we've got this contestation that has subsequently ensued between Leonard Modise, Tshepiso Modise, as well as Michael Sandlana. We know that Tshepiso Modise leads a faction in Springs. We know that Michael Sandlana leads another faction here in Pretoria called the Jerusalem faction, and we know that Leonard Modise leads the Zirbekom faction based in the south of Johannesburg. Now, what we were expecting at least 3 weeks ago, around the 13th of February, was the trial for the contestation of the estate as well as the leadership of the church to take place. That trial was set down for 3 weeks, and when the parties then gathered here inside the North Gauteng High Court, there were issues that were dealt with, of course, around the media being inside court. That was dealt with speedily, but then an application was made by the two Modise brothers, being Leonard and Tshepiso, for, in essence, the judge to recuse herself based on a technicality, saying that there was supposed to be written consent ahead of the trial beginning between the parties that would allow the judge, who was actually the case manager, to actually also preside over the trial. The arguments were heard briefly, but then the judge dismissed the initial application, and the lawyers then proceeded to lodge an appeal. Those arguments were then heard, and last week we were expecting to hear judgment in that appeal application for the judge to recuse herself, and shockingly enough, the judge then walked into court surrounded by at least 4 bodyguards, and she proceeded to tell the parties inside court as well as the gallery that she could not proceed with judgment because she had been receiving death threats, and intelligence officials were investigating this matter, and that in due course she would then alert the parties as to when we could reconvene for her to deliver her judgment. That day seems to be today, where we are expecting at around 10 a.m. this morning that Judge Portia Patlane will then deliver her judgment on whether or not she will be recusing herself from this matter. You mentioned, Gareth, that of course this church has not been without controversy in terms of the developments around the leadership battle. You would remember that terrifying hostage situation at the Zirbekom branch of the IPHC, where there was running gun battles, people were killed, people were set alight, which also prompted the CRL Rights Commission to then intervene and separate the parties, or have an agreement between the parties that each brother would then lead its own faction. Now, outside court, it is quite early, but I'm going to ask Mohammed to just show you that in every appearance, we have thousands of IPHC members, in particular from the Sandlana faction, the Jerusalem faction, coming out in their numbers to not only support their leader outside court, but also inside court. You can see already now the bus that has just delivered some of the supporters and members of the congregation. We have them standing outside court or lined up outside courts to try and make their way inside courts. Of course, there's only limited space inside court, so they're only going to allow a number of them to be able to go up to the courtroom for the judgment. But we are expecting more and more of these congregants to then gather outside court ahead of court proceedings at 10 a.m.